Not a truck driver, but once I was driving through the Canadian Rockies late at night and had just passed through a small town. So, I'm driving through the pitch black and I need to stop to pee and have a smoke. But because it's so dark, I missed the last rest stop for the next while. No problem, the highway is completely deserted. So, I pull to the side of the road, have my pee while staring out into the dark, and then light up a cigarette and stand by my car. As I'm standing there, I see the figure of a man just walking out of the tree line. I'm miles from civilization, patchy cell service, and there isn't a soul on the road. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me and maybe it was a deer, but nope, this was a man. So, I calmly walk back to the driver's door and get in, locking the doors behind me. I'm keeping my eye on this guy as I nervously smoke and have my car and drive, ready to peel out, but for some reason I just stayed put. The guy walks right up to my passenger door and knocks on the window. I crack the window and I ask what's up. He replies to me in a very serious tone, "I need you to call the cops." I cautiously ask why, and he tells me he had gone out into the woods to kill himself, but he couldn't go through with it because he had thought of his daughter's right before he was about to do it. I call the cops while the guy quietly cries outside. He had a kitchen knife that he was going to use on himself, so I stayed in the car and advised him to maybe leave the knife on the ground before the cops arrived. The cops came and got him, but before they left with him, I gave him a solid heart-to-heart and wished him well. I still think about him. I hope he was able to turn things around. Story 2. Trucker here. I think the best creepy thing that ever happened to me was I was heading from Tucson, Arizona up into Salt Lake City, UT. Well, this was a few years ago and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood, was under construction, so I had to take a weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. Well, it was getting late and I was getting tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. Now this was in the middle of nowhere. Closest town was like 40 miles away, so it is completely pitch black outside once I turn the lights off. Anyway, around 4 a.m. I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my truck, like playing with the air and power cables between my cab and the trailer, which is literally 6 inches from where my head is at, but on the outside of the cab. Then I feel something climb onto the landing that's on the back of my truck and it shakes my whole truck, so I'm guessing something around 200 to 300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point I'm YBF awake and I want to get this thing away from me, so I slam my hand into my cab while trying to scare whatever is out there, slam hard enough to really make it loud. I then hear someone, a male, scream bloody murder and I hear them fall off the back of my truck. I then hear about 15 other people all around my truck yelling. I climb up front, turn on my lights and illuminate a squad of Army reserves doing their midnight ruck march and capture drills. Turns out these guys were supposed to go find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight drills. That truck was 3 miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there and thought I was part of the drill. I'm ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test and legit was just there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio to their CO and tell him I was there and not have the other squads bother me. Story 3. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains/Minnesota area. One night around 2 a.m. I was hauling across North Dakota trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I've been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows that it is incredibly flat. Like, really flat. There also tends to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road that are far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane, approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was some retread off a blown tire. As I got closer, I noticed it was 2 people laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them and came to an almost complete stop. But they didn't move. Not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old graveyard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the road layers, along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes, will beat the shit out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the two people on the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old graveyard, I got to keep my truck, my job, and my teeth. Story 4. My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right, saw a woman with a mistrunchable bun, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knows how to react, the car pulls off at the next exit and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About half an hour later, a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad, with the same woman in the passenger seat, with the same expression on her face. My dad thinks fuck this and plans to pull into the next services to report, as even if it's nothing/misunderstanding, better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details, plates, etc., and he thinks there is no point calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman, same mistrunchable hair, same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window, so my dad pulls over into a lobby and calls the police. Apparently, they have received 3 other calls about the same woman/car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic, as he never heard anything more about it, but he didn't see her again, and although he kept an eye on the news, didn't see anything about it. Hopefully it's just a giant coincidence. Who knows? Story 5. Around 2006-ish, I was driving flatbed, picked up a load of construction material, drywall, roofing, don't remember, but it was prepackaged in boxes, and I remember having to use strap protectors on the load in rural Tennessee. Memory is foggy now, but I want to say it was between Memphis and Nashville, but closer to the intersection of the MS, AL, T and state lines. Tarp required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere woods on a 2-lane road, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind. Found a wide shoulder and pulled over to fix it. I realized that I just flat did a shitty job tarping this load and decided to redo it on the side of the road. Undo all the bungee straps, drag the tarps off, roll them back up, climb up on the load and start unrolling the tarps again, and I see a guy walking down the same side of the road I'm on, coming towards my truck. I don't think anything about it other than to keep an eye on him because I'm in the middle of nowhere and continue what I'm doing. About the time I have tarps set in place and am climbing down to start hooking the bungee straps back on, this dude is getting close enough that I'm now paying more attention to him than I am to tarping my load. I grab my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I'm working just in case. 8-pound solid metal bar about 4 feet long, tapered to a blunt point on one and hollow on the other, used for tightening straps and chains, etc. The guy gets to me and the first thing I notice is his hair. It's like a mullet, but it's patchy as fuck. Like he tried to cut his own hair and had a seizure in the process and said fuck it, good enough to party. The next thing I noticed were his eyes, which I can only describe as off. Like they were clear. I didn't think he was drunk or high or anything, but it also gave me the distinct impression that the elevator didn't go all the way up. Clothes were dirty and not well maintained, with dirty white tennis shoes, because I remember he didn't have laces on one shoe and the tongue was noticeably out of place. He stops by me, waits until I acknowledge him, and just says, "I've got a long walk." I am like, "Yeah man, you do, we're in the middle of nowhere." Making it clear there's no ride to be had here. He nods, starts walking by me, continuing on his way, stops at about the driver door on my truck and turns around, comes back to me and repeats himself. "I've got a long walk." At this point I explain that I can't give him a ride, insurance and all that. apologize for not being able to help him out, and he seems to accept this, turns around and leaves. I wait for him to get a little way away from my truck and start working on finishing the tarp job. I still keep an eye on him and he's moving away from me. As I'm putting on the last of the bungee straps, I look over to check where he's at and he's turned around heading back towards me, now about 100 yards in front of my truck and coming back my way. It looks like he's talking on a cell phone, as his hand up to his face and I can barely make out his mouth moving, his other hand waving like he's having a conversation with someone. I finish with the straps, grab my winch bar, and am climbing into my truck as he's about 10 yards away now. Soon as I'm in the cab, I lock the doors and set the winch bar on the passenger seat just in case. I look at the guy and realize he's not talking on a phone, he's talking to his fucking hand, and now I'm nervous because he doesn't look like he's having a nice pleasant chat. It looks more like an angry conversation. Crank the truck up, put it in gear, and just pull out. Didn't look for traffic or anything. As I pass him, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face with this dead-ass look on his face, just staring at me. Gave me the creeps. About the time I hit 5th or 6th gear, I look in the mirror and there's no one there. Story 6. I was driving through eastern Washington on some state roads. There were no rest stops or cities, but I had done the route enough to know there were these massive dirt areas every 50 miles where you could park safely away from the road. I decided to call it a night and closed my blinds and lay down to watch something on my phone. After roughly an hour, I hear someone try to open the driver's side door. I haven't heard any vehicles on the road the whole time I'm parked, but I get up to peek out the curtains. As I'm looking out into the blackness of the driver's side window, I hear them try the passenger side door. I peek down from the top of the curtain but can't see anything, so I start the truck and kick on the lights. I'm fairly freaked out at this point, so I'm still not opening the curtains but peeking through gaps. Nothing. Nobody is standing near either of my doors or parked within sight line. I take a deep breath and close the sleeper curtains too, because for some reason that's going to make things better, right? After laying back down and convincing myself that something blew against the truck and it only sounded like the doors, it was fairly windy outside and a lot of flat ground, I hear what sounds like someone trying to pry open the vents on the sleeper. The door handles start clicking again and the truck starts shifting like someone is climbing on it. I hit the little alarm button in the sleeper hoping to spook them off, but it does nothing but add to the noise of door handles, fingers tapping on windows and chassis, and the hiss of air coming out of the suspension. Then suddenly it stops. A few moments where I can only hear myself breathing and my heart pounding before I hear another truck approach and then drive by. I spent the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning I couldn't find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every window were tiny human-looking handprints, like a toddler had licked their hand and stuck it to my window over and over. Story 7. Not a truck driver, but I've spent the past 4 years driving every day/night for work.
I was in a fairly rural part of Mississippi, somewhere between Clarksdale and Greenwood. Important note, it's all 2-lane highway, the 250-mile drive home.
The weather had turned pretty sour as I was leaving Clarksdale. I called my wife, told her there was high wind advisories and very possible tornado threats throughout the Delta, and I called her as soon as I made it to a safe area again. I had already been working for 14 hours when I got in the truck, so I had eaten dinner and grabbed some coffee to stay awake and alert. Now, if you've never driven through flat farmland at night for 100 miles, it's very fatiguing and spooky without inclement weather. I had driven maybe 30 miles out into the farmland when hail started bouncing off my truck. Being an MS native, I knew in July hail meant tornado. I pull off to the side. I'm in the middle of nowhere, no lights to be seen, no cars behind or in front of me, and start looking for the storm/tornado I believe is approaching. I rolled the passenger window down and shined a bright flashlight off into the night. Nothing there. Turned to the driver's side, and this guy has his face pushed against the glass, grinning from ear to ear. I screamed and he was gone. I slammed the truck in drive and took off. We have all the time running cameras on our trucks. I got to the first safe place to stop and called my wife. I didn't want to scare her, so I didn't mention the guy or the hailstorm. I did, however, pull the SD card and check the cameras. I promise you this guy never popped up on my front or rear cameras. I've always played it off as my imagination. I will say I don't drive through the Delta in the dark anymore if I don't absolutely have to. Edit. Wow. Thanks for the awards, all. I've never had a comment or post blow up like this. Just some side notes due to recurring comments. I've tried to respond to everyone. Appearance. It was a tall male, very pale white, eyes were sunk back quite a bit. The grin is what truly got me. It was corner to corner with crooked teeth like the Cheshire Cat. Possible sleep deprivation. I've seen a few people concerned here. Our trucks are not semis. They are normal passenger/commuter vehicles equipped to carry/transport myself and my tools. We just have them outfitted with cameras and GPS for insurance purposes. We are not DOT regulated as we are passenger vehicles. Saw some obey regulations/laws on drive time comments. I will pull over and get a hotel if I feel sleepy/tired at all. I won't risk my safety or another motorist's just to get home. Why the flashlight? I'm a technician for 40 or so retail locations and oftentimes have to go in industrial building ceilings. The flashlight isn't a run-of-the-mill shine 15 to 20 feet in front of you light. It's a telescoping floodlight, one of the ones that can very easily throw a small beam of light 1,000 feet and clearly illuminate wherever it falls. Having endured one tornado in a vehicle, I wanted to see if I could spot the funnel and get out of the truck in a ditch if there was one coming. Story 8. Okay, got one while I was driving a bus, made from a truck, in the deserts of Central Australia. I was over 500 kilometers from the nearest town. So yeah, middle of nowhere stuff. So, I was out on a 5-day charter to pick up a bunch of Aboriginal elder women to go and get their women's business health checks done, pap smears and mammograms, etc. I believe, on the day I took them to get that done, we went by a place called Mintabi so they could shop in the clothing in whatever store that's randomly in this little opal mining area of South Australia. We left from there quite late to make the 3 or so hour journey back to where we were all staying overnight. The next day, I'd take them back to their respective desert communities. The passengers all fell asleep as they'd had a very long day, as had I, but that's my job. Even the nurse who was traveling with us fell asleep. So there's me, all alone in the cab of the Mercedes truck-derived bus, my 30 passengers all sleeping in the darkness of the passenger pod behind the cab, and it was around 9 p.m. Up ahead in the distance, I see a headlight coming towards me along the lonely desert dirt road, so I dip my lights so the spotlights go off, and just to see only what low beam will show me, I drive down into a slight dip of a dry creek bed expecting to see the car with only one headlight anytime shortly.